Welcome in to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Prehm and Erik Skopil here on this Monday edition. Eric, real quick, 82 degrees, middle of October on a Monday. It's great football weather. It looks like it's going to rain during the week, but then by the time the biggest game ever, maybe at Autzen Stadium, rolls around Saturday night, we should have 72 and sunny in Autzen. So looking like some prime weather conditions for some football, and I have a hot minute suspicion that today's podcast, Mailbag, is going to be centered largely around the general topic of Oregon, Ohio State. Number 2 versus number 3. It's pretty wild.
Crazy Saturday. Probably a Saturday you were kind of relieved you already had Oregon's game played. You know what I mean? You could just kind of sit back and watch it and let it unfold. And boy, did it unfold. And I mean, Vandy over Bama. You saw Tennessee go down. Miami had one of the crazier comebacks that I've seen. I know a lot of Oregon fans had their eyes glued to that one.
What a choke job that was by Cal.
Just bizarre. Michigan and Washington had quite the game back and forth. USC lost at Minnesota. A bunch of other things happened. Crazy weekend. And it led to Oregon flying up the polls, even though they didn't play on Saturday. Obviously, they played on Friday. Yep. And yeah, we have 2 versus 3, probably the most anticipated Oregon home game in program history. Well, I think we'll get to that topic, not today, but later in the week as we kind of let this matchup kind of percolate. But we do have a wide range of questions here, all football on this show. And we're going to start. The first half is going to be kind of mostly looking back at the Michigan State game. The second half, we'll get into some early Ohio State thoughts. Obviously, we'll keep talking about the Buckeyes and the Ducks in this matchup throughout the week. But let's start with a question from at @B_Fotef1, who asks, DJ and the red zone picks, what are you guys seeing as to why he's throwing them? Hashtag Autzen Audibles. I went and rewatched the game on Saturday. First off, I thought the defense played well on both of these. The first one, I think I'm probably more understanding of than the second one. I think the second one is one that should not be thrown, and certainly by a fifth-year player who'd already thrown 2 similar interceptions in the past couple of weeks. First one was a case of I thought Michigan State took away the first read right away. There were a couple of things coming off the line of scrimmage that kind of derailed those routes, but Patrick Herbert was running wide open across the end zone. His defender actually fell down, and if Dillon had thrown the ball a little bit earlier, a second or 2 earlier, and there was a Michigan State defender in his face, that's an easy touchdown, and that was a credit to the Michigan State defensive back because he came off of his man to come across the field to make pretty dang impressive interception. But that's a play where that was a kind of a, hey, the second read's gone. He has to create in his own. Didn't quite make the right decision. Second one, I just think was he's forcing it there. I don't know if there are many quarterbacks who could have fit it in. There was not much of a window. He was also throwing basically across his body, which is probably not going to get him the zip to get it there. And that ended up being, again, a good play by the defensive back to close on it, but probably a little bit easier play than you'd like to see from your veteran quarterback. So that's kind of the recap of what I saw in those 2 plays. In terms of why is he throwing them, I think he struggles a little bit sometimes when the first read's not there. Yeah. You talk about somebody who's as accurate and as consistently accurate as he's been this year. Obviously, last game was his worst game in terms of completion percentage. A part of that is knowing where to go with the football almost before the snap is there, right? Of just kind of come up going, okay, I see what the defense is doing. I know what we're doing. I know where I want to go with the football. If it's defended the way I think it is, the ball is coming out and going there. And you look at the 3 interceptions now, and at least a couple of them have been cases where maybe that first option wasn't there. He had to kind of go through his progressions and made some poor decisions in all those cases. And I don't know, Matt, I think this is a big storyline coming into this game. You can't have red zone issues. I talked about it after the game on Friday think about last year's regular season loss to Washington. You had those problems in the red zone, different problems, couldn't convert on 4th. You certainly have to maximize all scoring opportunities in this game. So this is undeniably a big talking point this week. We had several questions about it. Matt, did you see anything different, or did you have any other kind of contributions?
I just think he's pressing. He's talked a little bit about it. His eyes got too big for his stomach. It's kind of the quote that he dropped. Was that a beer, by the way? I mean,
it's not a beer. We talk. The people asked about this. This is a green tea. I don't drink coffee. This is a green tea. It looks like a beer. I'm sorry. It's in a tall glass.
I was gonna say, damn, it's Monday morning. Let's go. I think he's pressing. I don't know why. I don't know if he's trying to live up to the standard that Bo Nix set before him, or if it's a super high standard for himself, or the expectations externally of what this offense should look like. And they haven't 100% looked like that all year. And he talks about it all the time. Like, he's one of two guys that touches the ball every single time. And there's a lot of attention and responsibility that falls on that because of how often he gets the ball. I felt like both of them were pressed. The first one, you are right. Like, the play kind of got blown up. If I remember right, I think even Herbert got hit. Someone got hit in the backfield.
Zach Grace kind of got knocked off his route, and Terrence Ferguson kind of got knocked off his route. I think those were where the play were supposed to go, just kind of coming right off the line of scrimmage.
And so, from the very get-go, the play kind of got blown up a little bit. I didn't also like the fact that they rolled him out short side of the field, kind of shrank the field. And then, look, the reality is this offense in general, whether it's throwing or whether it's running, they struggle once the field shrinks and they get inside the 15, 20-yard line. I mean, they 94th in the country in red zone conversions for scores this season for Oregon football, 80% of the time. Ohio State's 100%. And I think Gabriel's part of it. I think the offensive line's part of it. It's the whole group. Why is this happening, though? I just think there's a little bit of pressing here, and I think he's struggling. I agree with you. He's struggling to process the next read after the first or second one when it's not there, and that could be for multiple reasons. His comfort level within the offense still maybe isn't there. Maybe he simply just can't, see it because of his height and being close, and that feels like an easy crutch excuse. But it's just a combination. It's off just a little bit, especially when they get inside the red zone. And he needs to be better, and he's the first one to tell you that he needs to be better in that area.
Just one thing. I don't have an issue with rolling him short side if that's him rolling and throwing it with his left. I mean, you know what I mean? Because otherwise he's throwing it across his body if he's going to the longer side necessarily. But what I did have, and that was actually the issue on the second one for me, was he was trying to throw the ball rolling kind of across his body to a receiver who was had a little bit of space, but not a lot. And
it's a hard throw. It's a
hard throw. And that's the other part is this is not Bo Nix who can make some of these really difficult throws. And that's not to say Dylan hasn't made some great throws this year. I think he does have better arm strength than some people think, but I think that third one, the one to Tez on the second quarter, that to me was a case of some of that lack of arm strength showing up. I just don't think he has the zip rolling that way to throw it that way. And that also reminds me of when he was rolling the other direction and he threw the dime two dimes, one to Trayshawn and then one to Evan. Those were both either stationary in the pocket or rolling where he's able to throw it not across his body, just kind of a natural left-handed throw. So I think playing to his advantages would help. I had somebody ask if we thought this was bad play calling and why aren't they running it? Well, it kind of dovetails into what Matt was saying about the reason they were in these spots is they weren't running the ball effectively in the red zone. The first interception on the pass to Herbert, he came after they got absolutely stuffed on two straight run plays from within the 3-yard line. So, I that part plays a role. Like if you convert, if you convert on those runs, you're not having to rely on the pass. So the play calling part, I keep seeing people bring this up. I think it's pretty bunk. And overall, I thought Will called a really good game on Friday.
I agree that Will called a really good game. I don't think the play calling at times is always there, though. I don't like the Amari Washington in the backfield.
You don't like that now?
No. Only because maybe they show it and they actually use it against Ohio State or another team down the road, but it's very obvious they're coming in and it's a run play. It's right up the gut. There's nothing on the perimeter. So the defense can pinch the defensive line. They can bring up the safeties. The linebackers can be basically at the line of scrimmage, and everyone knows where the football is going. And granted, it could be a case where they're setting it up for this weekend. That very may well be true. But I don't know. I think my issue is I have no problem with you running it twice. You can try the jumbo package once. If it works, it doesn't work. But after that, if it doesn't work, do something different. Go back to your bread and butter, because your best offensive rushing plays aren't Amari Washington in the backfield at the goal line. I understand he's humongous. I understand he's athletic, but go to your best run plays. Who cares what the down and distance is, or where you are in terms of relatively to the goal line? Run your best offensive plays that are run plays at least once. And I guarantee you that Amari Washington one is not one of their best offensive run plays.
I guess I understand that. I'd also say I thought they had a really fun counter off of that on the pitch to Jordan for the touchdown, where they started in that and then they flexed it out, and you had Connerly lined up as a tight end on one side. You had like an extra tackle, and you had Amari lined up, and they ran all this action to the right, and they came back. Like, that was what I was going to get into in the red zone. Was the two of their touchdowns in this game were off of really cool scheme plays where you had misdirection going right and you had the action coming left, and one of those did have that big personnel. So red zone offense is always tough. You watch it in the NFL. For those of you who watched a lot yesterday, there's a lot of stops. There's a lot of situations where it feels like it's too predictable. I think at times on Friday they ran really cool things that worked for touchdowns. I think at times the things didn't work, and whether that's play calling or poor execution, it's something they need to improve on, because the bigger picture here is going into this week, you have to win there, and you have to win there basically every time to earn this victory. Okay, second one from @HuskerDo84. It seems like Dillon Gabriel is limited. If he continues to struggle, do we switch to Dante? #Autzen Audibles. I brought this up so we could quickly say no. I don't see this happening, Matt. I don't think this is particularly close to happening. I know fans want to see the younger quarterback, the exciting quarterback. I think Dante's going to be a better quarterback than a lot of these guys that have come through here in terms of like the younger prospects they had to develop, because frankly, the school hasn't really developed anybody since Justin Herbert that's been here like from the start to the finish of their career. But I don't think he's ready right now. And I also think
qualifies. He was here too.
Right. Sure. I'm just saying, like, Dante, and I guess Dante did come in.
I get what you're saying. High school all the way through. Yeah.
Like these kind of had these spot guys, and like a guy like a Ty Thompson came in, was thought to be really highly regarded, just never worked out.
I get you.
You know what I mean? So I think Dante's going to be great. I don't think he's ready right now. And I think we'll see coming out of this Ohio State game, but I would be stunned if the staff thinks Dante gives them a better chance than Dillon. And I think Dillon's going to be up for this one. Like, you go back and think about what he did at Oklahoma last year against Texas in their biggest game of the season. Absolutely, one of his better performances. So I think he's a gamer. I think he'll be ready for this one. I don't think they're closing in on a switch to Dante, even though there's kind of like a vocal minority of the fan base that seemingly wants that right now.
I'm not going after the person that sent this. It's just the whole mentality of this is a 5-star guy, he automatically should be really, really good, is not the case. And I think, like you, Dante Moore is going to be a terrific player. I think we watch him practice, and every week we see him throw, and every week it's like, wow, damn, that was an impressive throw that he made look effortless. We saw that throw against Oregon State to Kyler Casper down the road. He's not ready yet, because if he was, he would be playing. He would have beaten out Dillon Gabriel. And I understand that there's some frustration, and we just talked about what Dillon Gabriel is not doing right, but everywhere he has gone, he has won at a high level, and he has been one of the best quarterbacks in college football, whether it was at UCF, whether it was at Oklahoma. And believe it or not, while some people want to disagree with this, Dillon Gabriel is one of the best quarterbacks in the country at Oregon this season. If not looking good and leading the country in completion percentage and being in the top 15 in QBR rating and having a really good touchdown to interception ratio, even when he's thrown 3 in the last 2 games, like, he's really good. And does he have his issues? Sure, but every quarterback does. And there's no reason right now Dante Moore should be in the discussion of playing, because if he was as good as some people want him to believe to be, he would be playing right now. He would have Oregon. It would be a malpractice for Oregon to have a younger, better, or equal quarterback than a senior and not play the younger guy, because it's all about, hey, if we have a guy that's just as good now, but he's got extra years of eligibility and he's going to be even better in 2 or 3 years, let's get him the experience so there's no drop off. So Moore would be playing right now if that was the case. He's not, and that's totally fine. Like, I think Dante Moore will slide in next season, will win the job, will be pretty good, and in 2 years could be really, really special.
Yeah, and I think the thing you have to consider too is there's a championship window this year, and whether or not you think Oregon can win a championship or not. And I mean, they're our third in the country right now. This is a pretty open year, I think, even though Oregon fans have been very critical of how this team has played. They are one of like 7 unbeaten Power 4 teams right now. Yeah. This team has a chance to do something special.
This weekend showed that maybe the nation was maybe the Oregon fan base was a little too harsh on Oregon for their first couple weeks of the season, especially against that Boise State game. And more importantly, it showed that there really isn't, at least yet, a wide gap between a bunch of these teams. I mean, Alabama just went and beat Georgia, and then the very next week lost to Vanderbilt. Tennessee lost to a backup QB at Arkansas. Even USC, a team that has had a loss earlier, went to Minnesota, a team that was 2-3 going into that game and lost. Michigan got blown out by Texas, but beat USC, and then went west to Washington and lost, who lost in ugly fashion to Rutgers the week before. Like, Oregon's undefeated, and it hasn't always looked pretty, but like you said, there are only a handful of teams left that haven't lost this season, and Oregon's one of them. And maybe it's time to start thinking about, who cares how they get to point A to point B in the journey? Like, as long as they get there, just keep doing it. Because that we're almost to that point now where it's, who cares how you win, just win.
Well, I think we're at that point, right? I mean, this is this is a who can survive the longest sort of a situation. And obviously this weekend's game will determine whether or not they have a chance to be undefeated in the regular season, at least. And my point, kind of going back to what I was getting at, is I think Dillon clearly gives you a better chance down the stretch run of the season, rather than going to a younger quarterback who might have some growing pains. And sure, the ceiling maybe is higher than I think Dante Moore has a chance to be a much more competent NFL quarterback, I'll say, than Dillon Gabriel. Dillon's also had a lot more experience, and you'd hate to be in a situation where you're putting out the younger guy and he has some growing pains and you lose a game to Maryland, right? Or you lose a game to Wisconsin that maybe you wouldn't have lost if you would have gone with your veteran guy. So keep that in mind too when you're suggesting to switch to the guy who, and again, a guy in Dante who everybody's really high on, but we saw what he did at UCLA last year, and that didn't look like somebody who was ready to go out and dominate. Like, if you want to go, let's go with the guy who's more exciting and younger. Let's also look at what he's done at the college football level compared to what Dillon has done. I mean, Dillon never had a season quite like the season Dante Moore just had at UCLA. Okay, third question from @NeedMyWholeName. Do we have a real kicking competition? If so, do you think there's any reason for concern, or should we just be happy we've got a guy that we got a 50-yarder through the post, #Autzen Audibles. I was actually surprised in rewatch how much rotations they made here. It wasn't just on the field goal. Boyle kicked a couple of extra points, he had one of the extra points and he had 2 kickoffs. Sappington had 4 of the other 4 extra points and the other 4 kickoffs. So Sappington still handled the majority of the work, but in general, this was more of a rotation than it maybe I kind of realized in real time, because when you're watching, sometimes you're not like, oh, who's kicking off, who's in charge of PATs. I do think they are rotating here, and Dan won't get into the details or the specifics of it, or like maybe the reasons behind when player X or player Z goes out there. But I think pretty clearly they are rotating. And in terms of cause for concern, I don't know if there necessarily is a major cause for concern. The one thing I would just be wary of is if you continue to rotate like this, is do you in any way ruin the rhythm of somebody, right? Like does Sappington miss a kick that he maybe wouldn't have otherwise because he's not getting as many opportunities, right? Does Boyle do something similar? But other than that, I don't really see a big issue as long as these guys are continuing to be accurate. And we know, I think, pretty clearly Boyle's the long range kicker and Sappington maybe handles the shorter kicks. That would be my guess based upon what we've seen. But no, I don't think this is something to be concerned about. I think this is a good thing because at least with Boyle, you've got somebody who's proven he can make a field goal longer than like 40 or 45 yards.
I am all in 100% agreement. And just to play devil's advocate here, like I just wonder what happens in a pressure situation. Who do you throw out there for a must-make field goal? And does the rotation kind of ever create some back of the mind concern with whoever's kicking? I don't know. Sappington definitely, I think he tried one against Idaho or Boise that it was kind of far and it didn't even come close. Boyle is the long range kicker. I do wonder though, like if there are a couple more opportunities for Boyle to make some 48, 50, 51, 52 yarders and he just hammers them through like he would, like he did the first time. If that kind of jolt is just, hey, let's go with Boyle. Like he full time. He's making him far. He's got the leg. He's juiced up right now. Let's go. Let's roll with him. But the reality is they've got two kickers and they both seem to be reliable. And it feels like since maybe Aiden Schneider of the mid 2010s that Oregon had a reliable kicker.
Yeah, Camden had that 1-2 season run where he was good, and then it kind of fell apart.
Yep.
I think Sappington and Camden are similar in that these are guys who are probably pretty consistent on shorter kicks, not as consistent the further you get out. Although I will say Sappington's already missed 2 PATs this year, which is I think more than Camden missed like in his whole career. So, I guess just my just to say it again, my general feel is like as long as these guys both understand their roles and what they're kind of handling, I think it's okay. But to your point, Matt, like if there's any confusion between the two of them of like who's going out there if the game is on the line, that becomes a concern for me because, having talked to kickers now for a couple of years, it's such a mental game. And so much of it is kind of having the right preparation, kind of even in like the lead up to that drive of like, okay, we're down 2 points. We have a chance to win with a field goal. You need to be kind of like psyching yourself up, getting yourself in the right mental kind of situation 5 to 10 minutes sometimes even before you kick. And if there's a sense that Sappington thinks he's the guy, but Boyle's the one who ends up kicking, you know what I mean? Like if there's any of that, and I don't really doubt the staff's ability to be pretty clear and concise with whose role is what, that would be where I would get a little bit concerned, I guess, just because I think it's such a mental part of it. But like as long as it's a pretty clear idea of like Sappington's kicking these sort of kicks, Boyle comes in when it's this distance or whatnot, I think you're probably going to be okay. And maybe in a certain way you benefit from having a little more versatility with the leg. But I will be curious to see if this continues to be a trend where they're rotating quite so much, because I was surprised in rewatch to see how much Boyle was actually out there.
All right, let's take a quick break. We come back. We'll wrap up the mailbag on the other end of the show with 2 more questions. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. 3 questions in, 2 more to go. Let's dive into this next one, which is on this weekend's game.
Yeah, from @Scott_MBT. Ohio State receivers versus Duck cornerbacks. Thoughts? This to me is probably the biggest positional kind of matchup I'm interested in, Matt. And we'll get into more of this as the week goes on. But, when you think about what Oregon secondary has done this year, it's been really impressive. I think probably haven't been many seasons with a better 5-game start than what they've done in terms of breaking up passes, in terms of allowing the opposing quarterback to complete passes, to giving up touchdown passes. Like there haven't been a lot of positive sequences or throws and catches for opposing quarterbacks all season. It just hasn't been something that's happened, right? The issue is Ohio State is so much more talented on the outside than any team we've seen Oregon play this year. And it's not even close. Like probably the 4s and 5s on Ohio State would be better than just about anybody, Oregon has seen, and 4s and 5s, that doesn't mean 4th or 5th string. That means like the number 4, number 5 guy. Like this is a really talented group. And if you watch any Ohio State game this season, you'll see Jeremiah Smith Jr., the true freshman, make an unbelievable catch. I think I saw somebody ask a question in the mailbag prompts here of like, how many catches does Smith make this week where you show it 20 to 30 times in the stadium because it's so incredible, because that's the kind of guy he is. So Smith versus Muhammad potentially for a game is going to be fascinating to watch, right? You get a veteran guy against the younger, more talented guy, a guy who's probably 5-6 inches taller than Jabbar, who has proven he's a dog already. Like, what does that matchup look like? Is that one where Oregon's able to consistently get stops and get off the field? Or is that one where whenever Will Howard, needs to go somewhere, he can go to this guy and he can win on the outside, probably in like just jump ball, out athleticism kind of situations. And then the other side is where it gets, and again, we don't know exactly how they're going to scheme this up, but I would imagine you'd have Muhammad on Jeremiah Smith, and you're probably going to have Nico Reed / Dante Manning on Emeka Egbuka. And that's another one where, we've talked about it. I think probably one of the bigger question marks on this defense is that second corner. And I don't think there's been a team that Oregon's played this year that's really been able to take advantage of that and really challenge that player very well, just because the quarterbacks haven't been very good and the secondary receivers haven't been great. This is not one of those weeks. This is a game where very clearly they could pick on whichever one of these corners they want with a guy like Egbuka, and he could have a huge game. So I think this is going to be fascinating. I think we believe through 5 games that the secondary has been awesome. I don't know if we'll come out of this week feeling quite as good, but the counter to that would be, Matt, that even if we come out saying, oh man, the secondary is susceptible, there's not another team on the schedule in the regular season that I look up and go, oh boy, they're able to totally, take advantage of it just the way Ohio State did. So going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. I also think there might be kind of like an overreaction to the fan base if like Smith or Egbuka have big games and everybody goes, oh, we don't have good corners. They might still be able to shut down the rest of the regular season pass offenses even after that, even if this isn't a great day.
It's going to be an interesting battle because you can't basically double one of these guys, because if you choose to double one on a consistent basis, that's going to open up the box for the running game with Judkins and Henderson. And this is why Ohio State is viewed in the way they are, because they have 2 legitimate number 1 wide receivers. So Emeka Egbuka would be wide receiver number 1 for basically anybody in the Big Ten, and almost anyone in the country, if he was thrown onto their roster. It's a small number of schools that he would not be the case. And then they have a really solid tight end, and they have 2 really dynamic running backs. And you're going to have to choose where you compromise your defense. And I think it's probably going to be Oregon's going to say, we don't want to be beaten over the top. We're going to have confidence that if we make Ohio State drive the length of the field, eventually we'll get a stop or they'll make a mistake and we'll take advantage of it. That's, I think, what Oregon's mindset will be going into this one. But back to the original question, Jabbar Muhammad will have it will be exciting. It will be entertaining. NFL scouts will be there to see Jeremiah Smith against Jabbar Muhammad. There will be a ton for this game. And then also, like, this is going to be Nico's and Dante Manning's opportunity to really showcase themselves to NFL scouts that will be here, and for Oregon to showcase their development and their depth in the secondary. Because if Dante Manning and Nico Reed win more than they lose at the matchup against Emeka Egbuka, and Jabbar Muhammad and Jeremiah Smith ends up being a net wash, like, Oregon's going to be in a really, really good position to win this game. And this is a huge week. And sometimes these happen where games, careers, seasons can come down to 1 or 2 weeks of a season. And this feels like one of them. for a lot of different storylines. It can change the outlook of Oregon's season. It can change the outlook of multiple guys in the secondary's pro career chances, and both directions. And this is the game. I think if Oregon can keep these two in check, you're not going to stop them. Like they're that good. And I know Oregon's secondary is good. I would be absolutely surprised, like if Jeremiah Smith has just like 3 catches for 38 yards and Emeka Ibuka has 4 catches for 45 yards. Like that would just be blasphemy. It just won't happen. That they will have success. One of them will have success. But it's, can you prevent the home run hits? Can you prevent the 65-yard touchdown catch that Jeremiah Smith dances and one hand grabs in the end zone? You know, like what can you do to limit the big play and just make them go the length of the football field? Because if you can and you make them do that consistently, I think Oregon eventually will win.
I think this is, if you're talking about people who have the most to potentially win, I think it's Jabbar, who was brought in as this lockdown corner from Washington, who had some awesome games last year, specifically against Oregon and against Texas. And this is potentially, though, I think I don't want to be too hyperbolic, and maybe fans will think this, oh, it's just a true freshman. I think Jeremiah Smith Jr. has a chance to be one of the best receivers we've seen come out of college football in a minute. And there's been some incredibly talented dudes. This guy is so physically developed already as a freshman at his size and his skill set. So, like, I know Muhammad is several years older, and you can diminish the fact that this is a true freshman going into this, but if he can consistently win and limit what Smith is able to do, there's going to be some talk nationally about that. Like, this won't be something that is just regional, I think. And to your point, Matt, like maybe this is a game where he increases his draft stock significantly, because this is against, albeit a teenager, NFL caliber of receiver.
Yeah, if he was eligible to enter his name in the draft, he'd be picked. Like,
oh yeah, absolutely,
like 100%. NFL scouts will be watching this one, whether it's a young guy against an old guy or not. Like, this is going to be a fascinating one to watch play out, and it's one that will come down to, like you said, like the other side. Can Nico Reed and Dante Manning elevate their play well enough? Can Oregon scheme it well enough that they win more than they lose?
Last question for the mailbag comes from one of our OGs at Robbie Parness on X. Both sides of the ball seem prone to slow start. Matt has written about the but the defense has allowed every team but Idaho to end up in scoring position on their first drive. How important is it to get off to a good start on both sides against Ohio State? Hashtag Autzen Audibles. That's a good point on the defense, by the way, because they've had, you think back to it, like Oregon State, you had the block kick. This last game against Michigan State, you had the fumble at the 1. So it hasn't felt like the opposing team has gotten out to these really fast starts. Like even UCLA, did UCLA miss their kick on their first drive? Is that right?
Yeah, got blocked.
So there's been 3 of these where it's felt like, well, they didn't come away with points, but they were in position. So that's a good point by Robbie in terms of the defense maybe having a sort of slow starts, even though points weren't scored. Just to the final part here, though, like if you think about just from like a game script of how you'd want this game to go, the worst possible outcome would be Ohio State gets up like 14-0.
Yeah.
Not that Oregon isn't built to throw the ball all over the place and try to come back, but I do think just top to bottom, you'd rather this team play with the lead. I know that's like super, super obvious, but just in the point of this this question here, in the context of it, yeah, I think it's very important Oregon is at least tied or, you know, within striking distance or even playing with a lead early, because you see what Ohio State's been able to do this year, where they've just kind of gotten it rolling early. I know it didn't happen against Michigan State, but this last game against Iowa, it felt like it was like 35-0 in a blink of an eye. And obviously you're not coming back from down that many points. If you're Iowa, you're probably not doing that if you're Oregon either. But, you know, if you are this Oregon team and the way that they've started, you know, you'd like to be you'd like to be close early, because I think if Ohio State gets momentum, it becomes really difficult with those two running backs. And frankly, and we talked about Dylan Gabriel in glowing terms. I do get a little bit worried if it feels like everything's on his shoulders, kind of to the psychological part we had early here on those interceptions, which I don't know if that's exactly why it's taking place, but it would make sense if it would. You just would hate to be like, hey, Dylan, you guys are down 2 scores within the first 10 minutes of this game, and now everything's on you guys, and he starts pressing and he makes more mistakes, and this thing sort of snowballs. So yeah, I think it's really important, and it's kind of an obvious one, but I think it's really important that the defense at least holds Ohio State from getting all over them right away, gets a couple of possessions where, you know, maybe you at least make them work for it and you force a field goal as opposed to right down the field and giving up 6. Because while I think this offense is good enough to score some points in this game, I also think Ohio State's defense is awesome. And this is probably not a game where you're scoring 35 plus points anyway, and you'd hate to try to do all that late. So yeah, I think a quick start is imperative here.
You absolutely cannot drive down the length of the field, have a red zone turnover like they did against Michigan State, and then not get, I mean, I don't want to call it lucky, but very fortunate to have Michigan State fumble at the 1. But you can't have a red zone turnover or even like a 3-and-out, and Ohio State goes right down the field and scores with ease, because now all of a sudden the fear of doubt creeps in a little bit of, can you keep pace? Because it was difficult for you and it was easy for them. And to your point, like, they go up 14 or 10-0 in the first quarter, or, you know, in their first 2 drives, that you're playing from behind the rest of the way. And that's really hard to do. It's really hard to come back. It's really, because you have to string together really good offensive drives, and you have to get the ball back multiple times to not only tie the game, but to get the lead back and then hold them long enough so that you can get the ball back again with the lead to then start milking the clock to win the game. So yeah, like, a hot start is imperative. You cannot have a slow start on both sides. Like, if it comes out and it's a shootout, that's fine. Like, you can live with that. But what you can't live with is falling behind by multiple scores because your offense and your defense aren't playing at a high level at the same time. You know, one of them has to be clicking right away.
Well, and I was just going to say, the other part on this is we've already seen the offense be, let's be honest, a little bit mistake prone. Mm-hmm. You know, shooting themselves in the foot. If you create a situation where it is, let's just call it 14-0 after the first quarter, the margin for error for that offense becomes probably 0.
Yes.
Where it's like every drive has to end in points, whether it be a touchdown, and probably needs to be a touchdown, but maybe a field goal sometimes. And with the way they've executed in the red zone and the way they've kind of had their own issues, that's a lot to ask going against a defense that is so much better than any defense they've played this year. So yeah, I think that's another storyline for this one. Got to start out quick. Can't get behind. I don't know if this team – I think this team could play with, trailing against a lot of teams in the country. I think
this is not one.
Probably every team on the schedule. But, yeah, to your point, Matt, I don't think this is a team you want to mess around with. You better come out. Like, to me, and we'll do our game picks, obviously, later in the week, and we'll have all sorts of content previewing this. But to me, this is one where I think the offense has to play comparable or similar to how they played in Corvallis, where it's like – points on pretty much every drive if they're going to give themselves a shot. And that's not to say the defense won't get stops, but you need the offense to execute really, really well. And you certainly need to kind of bring home the point from earlier on the show. You certainly need them to do well at the end of drives. Like, if you're able to drive the length of the field, you can't come up empty. I think that's a really big one here, because Matt, I think you have the stat, like, Ohio State basically always scores on they get in the red zone. And,
they're 100%. They're 100%. They have not had a red zone attempt where they have not scored. I actually thought about this earlier today for our preview show. I'll just say it now. Like, you can't offensively, Oregon cannot have drives that stall out because of penalty or because of poor blocking that prevents you from getting into field goal range on a 3rd down situation. They cannot have opportunities where a turnover takes away a guaranteed field goal, a possible touchdown. They can't have opportunities where you get into the red zone and you walk away with 0 points. Like, any chance you get into scoring position, you have to get the minimum. And you have to give yourself points. You can't walk away off the field saying, wow, we were at Ohio State's 32-yard line or their 17 and we had 0 points. Even if it's just 3, you can't walk away leaving points on the field.
Last point I had here, and it's not to do with this, but it's just something to kind of chew on throughout the week. A buddy of mine texted me this. Big Ten teams are, and this is going east or going west, 1-7 so far this season when they travel 2 time zones, again, one way.
Interesting.
So the only win right now, I think, has been Washington holding off Northwestern at home. Every other game where a team, again, that could be a team coming from the Midwest to the West Coast or a West Coast team going to the Midwest, has lost when they've had to go for a trip like that. So just keep that in the back of your mind here. Maybe that plays a role here for Ohio State coming west. Because so far the trend, again, really small sample size. We're very early on in this conference season. There's going to be a lot more data later. So far the trend has been those teams have not fared very well when they've had to go on these long trips.
All right, it's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Thank you for submitting your questions. We look forward to covering this game in full detail on duckterritory.com all week leading up to Saturday's 4:30 kickoff. Until then, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.